Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox and thanks for logging on. If you love what you see here, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com because every watch in this show is for sale. Names, references, and when available, prices below in the description. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com and I am asking you to hook up me. We are buying, paying our top dollar for the year as we stock up for the holidays. Sell a watch, one watch for an entire collection, no upper limit on value paid. Again, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com to sell your watch. But here's one you may wish to buy. That's right, it is the new Rolex Kermit, the Commando Kermit, full ceramic bezel, 41mm case. This is a timepiece that has engendered a great deal of speculation regarding its size, and I'm going to answer all of those questions right here, right now. Let's start with the most basic. I'm going to measure the outer extremity of the bezel, and you can see it's about 40.6 across the bezel. If I measure the case diagonally, you can see it measures a little bit larger. But truth be told, I think the bezel is the genuine measurement. It's a difficult thing to grab because the oyster case, there it is, the oyster case is so irregularly shaped. It's more of a cushion than a round case. So just the bezel itself, 40.6. Now thickness, I'm not including the Cyclops eye here. You can see the thickness of the watch is about 12.4 if I'm not applying any pressure. Lug to lug, the watch is actually close to identical to the old timepiece. As you can see, it is about 48 on the nose, and then end link to end link, you can see that it is 51.1. Now I'm going to pull out a previous generation LB 613. We're going to take a quick look at the thickness of this one, which you can see is remarkably close. It's a little bit thicker. Lug to lug, you can see it's almost exactly the same. We're talking a difference of about 0.2 or 0.3 millimeters. And then end link to end link, you can see it's about 50.7. We're talking fractions of a millimeter. Now, this is what it means to refine, because this watch is not a revolution, except perhaps for inside the case where you get a 70-hour power reserve compared to the previous 48. You'll also note that the sculpting of the case is distinct as the lugs are considerably less squared off. They're a bit more tapered, they're definitely narrower, and if you look at the previous case, this is where the newer watch really stands apart. Remember, we were talking about the 40.6 millimeter measurement at the extremity of the bezel before. This is 40.2. We are talking small changes. Now jumping back to the new Kermit, we're going to take a look at the clasp. As you can see, not a whole lot has changed. Pop it open. There's a beacon to hook, that one vertical locking system, and then there's the clamshell external. Internal, we have the glide lock system as before. Not much has changed, although I'll mention this, it seems a bit more fluid. Maybe that's because this watch is fresh from the factory, but I will say that it seems to move in and out more easily than in the past. Of course, it's an incremental adjustment system, and the increments are individually 2 millimeters. Throwing it on the wrist, I had long speculated that the next generation green sub might be a fusion of the Hulk and the Kermit, and that's exactly what we have right here. The timepiece wears easily, comfortably, and if I may say, identically to the previous 40mm watch. Again, my buddy Brandon has lent me his bluesy right here, and I'm going to throw this on my wrist so you can compare it. As you note, this watch has been somewhat loved, so there are case marks. It doesn't look a damn millimeter different. There is really no change from an ergonomic standpoint. So if you could wear the old sub, you can definitely wear the new sub, now in stock at the WatchBox. Let's hear that bezel, and let's do a quick Lume shot. Here we are with the new sub, Rolex Chromalight Lume. Here we are with the Panerai PAM 616, or I should say 616. And then here we are with the Type 5 from Resence. This is the Resence dive watch. So here's the 616, here's the Resence Type 5, and one more time as a parting shot, here is the new sub. Now, we've spoken of the sub, let's talk of Panerai. When this watch came out in 2015, I have to admit, I was kind of taken by it. I'm not a Panerai guy, I'm not necessarily a dive watch purist, and I'm definitely not into Fotina. All of that being said, this is a timepiece that has a lot of charisma, primarily because it was so different from any Panerai that came before. Yes, it's a Luminor 1950 47mm submersible, but it also has this lovely and distinctive carbon composite grain. The actual fibers that are used create a tree-like pattern, so if you've seen the rings of a tree once cut, that's very similar to what the ultimate machined and autoclaved Carbotech carbon fiber looks like, and you can see it's been used pervasively. It's used in the bezel, it's used in the crown guard structure, it's even used in the locking lever, and the nice thing about it is it's hypoallergenic and it is very, very light. So this watch with a titanium case back, a large sapphire, a carbon case, it wears feather light on the wrist, and although a 47, I can tell you, my 16 centimeter circumference wrist wears it well. Big and stark. That's definitely the look. That said, it's comfortable and secure. I would wear this with great pleasure. Now, the bezel here is the best diving bezel in the world, both for feel and for sound. Let's have a listen. Sharp, mechanical, distinct, and precise. The watch features an automatic winding Panerai caliber with a 3-day power reserve. It's the caliber P9000. You can see the SLC, the Solura Alanta Corsa, on the back, the manned torpedo used by the Decima Flotilla during World War II. Those were the Italian Navy frogmen. And of course, the timepiece 300 meters water resistant and an ISO 6425 diver. It has a remarkably distinctive and famous profile with that locking lever and crescent-shaped crown guard. That said, my favorite diver on the table today is probably the Resonance Type 5, a 46mm titanium watch, and you can see it is grade 5 titanium. It's basically all dial. The dial contains oil, and the index of refraction for the oil as well as the sapphire identical, so you could see it from any angle without distortion. You'll also appreciate the fact that there's a lot going on here as it features a regulator dial. You've got a combination of seconds, minutes, and hours. And I'm going to show you how you set this thing, because it's a little bit different from the other Resonance watches in that it has a lock and unlock system, because it does feature a unidirectional rotating diving bezel. The thing is, you can also rotate the dial itself, so you need to be able to lock the dial with respect to the bezel, and you do that by aligning the switch on the side with lock. Now, you don't have to worry about that inadvertent movement. In order to set it, you move to setup, and now you use the case back, and I'm going to demonstrate this as best I can from overhead. You use the case back to set the time. There is a internal bellows system that takes up some of the slack, allowing for expansion and contraction of the oil, so it is relatively insensitive to temperature changes, but you do want to keep the extremes in mind, which is why you have an oil temperature gauge on the dial side. Now, you saw the Lume before, and it is extraordinary. How do you read this watch? Quite simply. As you can see, the time right here is 8 o'clock, and the watch is beautifully loomed as we saw earlier, but why not do another Lume shot just to hammer home the effect? 46mm in grade 5 tie. This watch is 100 meters water resistant, and it should be noted that previous Resonance watches were water resistant for dust and moisture only. They were 1 ATM. With 100 meter capability, this is as close as Resonance has come to a no-holds-barred diver, and you can even see the locking mechanism on the side is loomed. This watch is rife with exquisite details. I should mention it's also automatic winding and equipped with a ETA caliber and a 42-hour power reserve. Taking a quick look now at a watch that's new for this year. This is part of a redesigned series of Grand Seiko Spring Drive Sport GMTs that are far more wearable than the enormous watches that came before them. At 40.5mm, this SBGE 253 is a wonderful all-around sports option that can also be worn with a relatively formal attire, something that was not possible when all the Grand Seiko Spring Drive GMTs were the size of softballs. The watch wears easily on my wrist, and you can see it's handsome across the wrist with a reasonable span of just about 51mm. It's actually quite similar to the Sub in how it wears and fits. It's got 2 time zones and a power reserve indicator on a dial. It is robustly loomed, and it is 200 meters water resistant. Not much to see underneath the case back, but inside you have a Spring Drive caliber with a 3-day automatic winding power reserve. This is the caliber 9R66. It is accurate to plus or minus 15 seconds a month, which is an exquisite margin of accuracy, as if you remember, a COSC chronometer, a mechanical one, can deviate by as much as 6 seconds a day. This is 15 seconds per month. Plenty of lume, 2 time zones, power reserve, date, stainless steel, ceramic bezel, very practical. You can even see the tin plate manual polishing lavished on the case. This is the Zaratsu polish, of which Grand Seiko often speaks in its marketing material. And whatever you want to call it, Zalitz machine polishing, Zaratsu, black polish, it's all of those things. And it's a craft that takes about 3 years to master. It significantly beautifies the watch. The dial furniture also on Grand Seiko is of surpassing quality, as each individual index, as well as the hands, the Grand Seiko logo, they have all been micrometrically finished by artisans who work with diamond-tipped miniature tools and basically create only these components all day long. The dial furniture of the watch, world-class in the case of Grand Seiko. Let's talk about 2 watches that could not be more different. The first is the Breitling Super Ocean Heritage Chronoworks. It is the Super Ocean Heritage Chronograph Chronoworks, to be precise. At 46 millimeters and entirely in ceramic, this was Breitling's first foray into full ceramic construction of a watch back at Bosworld 2016. 100 were made, and it was supposed to mark the dawn of a new high-tech research and development unit at Breitling. This was largely scuttled with the CVC Capital Partners takeover of the company in 2017, which orphaned this watch and made it fairly unique. I consider this to be favorably comparable to the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Compressor Extreme Lab 2 for technical innovation. Now, the 100 pieces of this watch cost $40,000 at retail, and the reason has nothing to do with the 46 millimeter scratch-resistant case. This is actually one instance in which a Breitling is all about the movement. Now, this is the caliber B01C because the bridges and plates here are made of ceramic, which allows many of the staffs of the wheels and their pinions at the end to simply sit inside the bridges and the plates. So the wheels are able to pivot inside unlubricated ceramic fittings, eliminating the need for pivot jewels and the oil that's then applied to allow conventional drivetrains to operate with low friction. So you have fewer jewels here, you have fewer lubricated pivot points, and as a result, you have both less friction and better performance in between services. The power reserve increases from 70 hours to 100 hours, partly as a result of the diminished friction. There's a new system for engaging the chronograph that creates an even smoother engagement, and this is largely due to wheels that feature what are effectively sprung teeth that mesh together. You'll also note, and I'm going to do my best to show you right here, that balance, which is now free-sprung compared to a standard B01, that balance includes multiple materials that are designed to average out the thermal variation, so expansion and contraction varying by material, so that the net zero is our result. As a result, cold, hot, it doesn't really affect the precision of this watch, which is certified as a chronometer. And of course, it also features a silicone hairspring that further immunizes the watch against variation, magnetic in that instance. Vertical clutch, column wheel, automatic winding, and of course, being a Super Ocean Heritage, it is highly water resistant. This is one you can wear all the time. Let's have a listen to the bezel. And if you take a quick look, you could see that the bezel uses captive construction, so there are screws fixing the bezel to the case. This is distinct from the snap-on bezels used by Omega, Tag, Rolex. This is more like the way Zinn builds a watch, so you have to dismantle the bezel. It can't be snapped off by accident. And of course, the timepiece features Breitling's best clasp and strap, as we've got this lovely Ocean Classic inspired mesh style rubber strap, and then we have a full matching ceramic clasp with twin trigger release, so it can't pop open accidentally, and there's a push button slider built in, so you can see how there's incremental adjustment, and you're able to use a sliding track, much like the Rolex Glide Lock system, so that you can incrementally size or pull it all the way out over a diving suit. This is a watch that features no fewer than 5 original patents in the design of its mostly ceramic, low friction, chronometer certified movement, greater power reserve, thermal resilience, magnetic resilience, accuracy, and endurance. This is the only member of the ChronoWorks family. Again, in the Schneider era of Breitling, this was to have been the future. Much like the Lockheed Skunk Works, there was going to be a series of low-volume, high-spec, high-tech watches. As it happens, this will be the lone member of the family. That said, Moser is anything but done. with its controlling family, as the Mélon family, led by CEO Edward Mélon, has completely remade Moser, a once interesting but financially fraught independent out of Schaffhausen. Today they're run by folks with actual business degrees, and the watches have never been better. I'm gonna get my polishing cloth here. The company is now on a firm footing and probably the hottest independent not called FP Journe at the moment. The timepieces are all handsome and exclusive, with Moser building about 1,500 watches a year out of Schaffhausen. And this is a lovely Venturer Small Seconds Purity, a limited edition of 100 pieces, 39 millimeters in white gold. You can see it features the signatures of the brand: Funky Blue, which is an original color and an original name, as well as a fumé fade that fades from silver blue at the center to black at the edge. Now this is the Purity dial, so you can see it is unadorned. We have a few white gold indices, but no marquee, no name. It doesn't even mention Swiss manufacturer, although rest assured, everything in this watch is Swiss made. The timepiece is powered by caliber 232 manufacturer movement on the reverse side. You can see this is 1 of 100. It's a handsomely executed movement with a 3-day manual wind power reserve. This is a case back power reserve indicator, and then it's particularly resilient thanks to an overcoil hairspring which Moser makes in-house. In fact, Moser makes the escapement, the balance, and the hairspring through its precision engineering subsidiary, and the fact that it's a full balance bridge and free sprung makes it more shock tolerant. Now the timepiece beats away at 18,000 vibrations per hour, which is a lovely and stately traditional beat rate. It features stop seconds, and the case sculpting with Moser watches is always exquisite. Note the fluid concave mirror-like profiles to the scalloped lugs, the domed and polished bezel, the vertical satin finish of the mid-case on both sides. It is a gorgeous case. The strap is kudu, and if, like me, you need to open another window and Google kudu to find out what this animal looks like, well, I can't blame you. I did the same. Throw the watch on the wrist, and you can see it is very easy to wear. It's 12.4 millimeters thick. Most of that is because of the domed bezel. The watch itself, the actual hardware, is only about 8.5 millimeters, and it slides easily under a cuff. It's about 45 millimeters from lug to lug, so it's going to wear well on a small wrist. And again, this is a true high horology, independent horology product, and you're getting it from a company that's rock solid. That's one of the questions people always have about buying non-group watch products. Will the company be around? Are they on a firm footing? Are they led by people with business sense, not just, well, let's be honest, a romantic dream, as too many independents are? Moser is absolutely that independent that's going to be here today, tomorrow, and beyond to service what it makes. And this Venturer Purity Small Seconds is a great example of what Moser does best. A bit more Breitling. Now this one is interesting because Breitling and Tudor have an alliance. Tudor uses a modified version of the Breitling B01 chronograph, and Breitling uses a version of the Tudor MT5612 from the Pelagos, and that's what we have right here. Launched in 2017, this is the 42mm stainless steel Breitling Super Ocean Heritage 242. And a lot like a Chronoworks, it's a fun watch to own because it's more mechanically refined than you would expect from a Breitling, a brand that's generally traded on history and aesthetics. This watch is technically proficient as well. It's also more wearable than your typical Breitling. As you can see, just over 51 millimeters lug to lug. The 42 is the one to buy. The watch sits relatively low, although it's not a thin timepiece, and on the same kind of strap as the Chronoworks, you see the timepiece has a similar aesthetic. It also has a similar clasp, not ceramic here, but made of steel like the watch. We have that twin trigger release, and then internally you can see we have that slider system that gives us incremental as well as all-out adjustment and dive extension if we wish. Not a whole lot to see on the case back, but there is a Tudor movement in there. You're going to have to take my word for it. 70-hour power reserve, 5-position adjusted COSC chronometer. It's got that same architecture we just saw on the Moser with a full balance bridge and a free-sprung index for shock resistance. Breitling prefers to use a tunable and repairable ferrous metal hairspring rather than the Tudor silicon hairspring, which is not as anti-magnetic. Of course, silicon is peerless in that regard, but the Breitling hairspring, on the other hand, is more tunable and repairable, so that has its own advantages. And this is a diver. The previous Super Ocean Heritage used an anodized aluminum insert for the bezel. This one uses a ceramic insert, and we've got that same screw-fixed captive bezel arrangement from the Chronoworks. Another upgrade on this model from the previous Super Ocean Heritage is the use of a lumed pearl in the bezel. There used to be no luminescence in the Super Ocean Heritage bezel, and for dive watches, that just made no sense to me. So this is a timepiece that's aesthetically and mechanically quite refined and probably the best fit among the Super Ocean Heritage family. I feel like independents are a bit of a theme on the show today, and why not? I love them. This is one of the few operating out of England, at least within the realm of affordability. The Bremont Boeing collection had a series of watches that were inspired by Boeing aircraft, and the Bremont Boeing Chronograph GMT might have been the most versatile. This watch can do it all. The Chronograph GMT, but it's got more to it than just that. It's also a COSC certified chronometer. It's also 100 meters water resistant. It is also shock resistant. And if you look very closely, you can see the shock resistance logo on the dial. And Bremont has a very elaborate system whereby the outskirts of the movement, inboard of the movement holder, are actually mounted on rubber shocks. So there's an isolation between the movement and the case itself, resulting in a very resilient caliber. It's already quite tough as a 7750 architecture, but with the addition of the rubber bumpers and the isolation, it becomes downright indestructible. 100 meters is more than sufficient for aviation timepieces. Most of them are 30 to 60 meters water resistant, so though this is not a dive watch, it's absolutely swimmable. Equipped on a full rubber strap, this one is ready for the water with no excuses. And as you can see, the case, inspired by aviation, uses grade 5 titanium. So as you can see, there are a few polished highlights. That's how you know you're looking at grade 5, not grade 2. It's also known as 6-4 titanium in the aviation, and for that matter, the road biking industry. If you take a look at the bezel, it has a wonderful turbine-like or perhaps helical gear-like slash cut that makes it very easy to grip. You can see the insert right here is ceramic for scratch resilience, and you can use it as an impromptu timer. Line it up with the minute hand, and now you have a 0 to 60 minute count-up timer, which is useful because the chronograph has a 30-minute register, so you can actually time those minutes 31 through 60 that a conventional chronograph cannot. Of course, you have the Boeing logo as the tip of the chronograph seconds hand, and there's a lot to love in this British-built, British-tuned watch. 43 millimeters in grade 5 tie, so it's going to wear fairly easy on the wrist, but it is thick, I'm not going to lie. It's the case construction of Bremont, which separates the canister for the dial and the movement from the lugs, that makes this a more wearable and altogether more agreeable fit, even on a smaller wrist like mine. I'm a big fan of this watch. Let's do a Lume Chat. And as you can see, we are back with the Bremont Boeing, and it is quite well loomed by night. You'll note that the entire bezel is luminescent, so it's particularly easy to trace the minute hand against the bezel pearl. You'll also appreciate that the second time zone of the GMT-E is visible by night, so you're going to have no trouble reading the local or the reference time zones with this watch. Here's another one that we're going to discuss in detail. This one from Linda Verdlin, the Octopus Grande Date. The Octopus Double Date. This is one heck of a watch. Technically part of the Octopus 2 family. It's difficult to describe the size of this watch because, frankly, the timepiece is irregularly shaped. Round watches are straightforward, but I wouldn't necessarily describe this as a nominally 46 millimeter watch, because on my wrist, you can see the curvature of the strap around the wrist. It wears more like, I would say, a 43. It's a timepiece that's light, comfortable, easy to wear, and as you can see, nicely shielded by a ceramic bezel to prevent scratches. It's also emblematic of good design, and while Linda Verdlin shies away from classifying itself or pigeonholing itself as Danish design, there's definitely a sense of functional ergonomics, modularity, and yes, customizability as the watch effectively goes together like, and I'm sorry to say this, Legos. You've got a modular strap system that allows you to quickly swap straps. There are a million Linda Verdlin option straps, as well as bracelets to replace this one. You've got a buckle, but you've got many buckle options, even deployance. Again, everything can be replaced on this watch. You have wings on each side of the case that are designed as docking points for the reef and the rock. The Danish-made diving and land sports computers of Linda Verdlin, respectively. Let's face it, no one is going to go diving with a dive watch as their primary diving instrument. This is foolish. This is an analog backup at best. You're going to want to dive with a computer if you're serious about your sport, and the computer locks onto the case. It's self-powered. It has multiple timers, depth gauges, alarms, data recording. Everything you need as a true professional diver goes on top of the watch. When you surface, you pull the module off and it becomes a mechanical watch again. The same is true for the Rock, which is their land sports, specifically their ski computer. Now we'll get a little bit closer here. You can see that the timepiece is a limited edition. Number 8 of 88, most auspicious, and as you can see, the timepiece water resistant down to 300 meters. Although it is not technically a dive watch because it doesn't have a rotating reference bezel, it is absolutely a diveable watch. The faceting of the case sets it apart from other watches in the segment, and while it's clearly in the vein of the Hublot Big Bang and the Royal Oak Offshore, it manages to fit within the genre without seeming derivative of the dominant players. You can even see that they're well-executed accents, such as the washers for the bezel bolts, as well as the case gaskets. It's a truly fascinating, original, and ultimately fairly exclusive option, as Linda Verdlin only makes a couple of hundred watches a year, so this is an awesome way to get into independent horology from a brand that's way off the beaten path, and yet has about 2 decades of history behind it, so they're around to stay, and they're run by actual businessmen, and this is a great way to get into an independent brand with a watch that is no excuses. Reliable, tough, versatile, and even easy to fit on a smaller wrist. This is a watch that I didn't believe actually existed. 42 millimeters in stainless steel. This is the Zenith Elite 6150. After the Salida debacle with the Pilot Extra Special back in 2014, Zenith declared that it would not, in fact, be retiring the Elite and doubled down on the Elite caliber while phasing out the Salida. But the redesigned 6150, a 100-hour twin-barrel version of the Elite, was a watch I believed didn't exist. I didn't think this got past the rendering phase because I've never seen one of these in person, but here it is, twin mainspring barrels and a 100-hour power reserve, about as clean a watch as you can find, 9.6 millimeters thick with a movement that's still under 4 millimeters thick. The twin-barrel Zenith Elite is the king of Elite calibers and the most advanced time-only movement that Zenith possesses. And this is how it looks in the clean, almost clinical Elite 6150 package. Super sharp, unadorned, unmarred by extraneous text. This is as good as dress watches get. Now, if you want a sports watch that can do it all, you can get something like the Linda Verdlin, which is expandable via modules, or you can go with a watch that features all the content packaged in. And that's exactly what you get in the Blancpain Le Mans GMT Revi. 100 meters water resistant, fully lumed, and I mean everything is lumed. 40 millimeters in titanium with rose gold accents. This is a remarkably clean assembly of automatic winding, a second time zone, a power reserve, and a multifaceted alarm. Let me see if I can get everything lined up for a moment and we can take a listen. Take a listen to the alarm. If I haven't screwed this up. Don't do that to me. Well, I'll continue to work on that. In the meantime, it's important to note that the watch features an awful lot of functionality, starting with the alarm, which features a power reserve indicator, an on-off function, the ability to wind itself automatically, which is highly unusual in the watch space, as in general, you have to manually wind alarms. There we go. In general, you have to manually wind alarms in alarm watches. That's how every Vulcain and Jaeger-LeCoultre Memovox alarm watch works. Here, you have automatic winding for both the movement and for the alarm. So you wind up with an alarm that is ever ready. There's an on-off function so it doesn't wake you up in the middle of the night, and there's a power reserve so you know if the alarm is not ready to go. There's also a second 24-hour time zone that is settable independently from that at center. Of course, there's a date, and note that every sub-register of the dial is fully loomed. So with the 100-meter water resistance and the hand-finished caliber 1241G movement, you're getting an awful lot of value here. The anglage in particular is broad, mirrored, and visible without the aid of magnifying optics. So you don't need 6, 10, 12 power loops to appreciate the finish on this movement. It's just objectively good looking. And as you can see, it's also fairly sophisticated with a 5-position chronometer style adjustment and a free sprung balance. You can also see that the striker for the arm is entirely black polished. Again, you can see just how broad that beveling is on the edge of all the bridges, and all of the screws are true fired blue. It comes with a matching full deployant clasp. Throw it on the wrist, and this satin finished assembly of rose gold and titanium winds up looking sophisticated, youthful, contemporary, and remarkably compact, as when you first see this dial, you expect a larger watch. In fact, it's anything but. I want to show you a lume shot so you can see just how pervasively loomed this dial is. Like I said, absolutely no excuses here. You can see everything. You can even set the alarm and read the alarm power reserve by night with this watch. If you want a sports watch for less money, but with no less style, consider the revived Bulgari aluminum chronograph. First launched in 1998 as the first all-aluminum sports watch series, the Bulgari aluminum merged with the Diagono in the early 2000s and was gradually phased out. Bulgari has revived its famed pioneering aluminum case here in 40 millimeters for 2020, and we're just starting to see these pre-owned. Rubber bezel with the diagonally opposed Bulgari motif coined by Gerald Genta in the late 70s. There's a lovely off-white dial with radially arrayed chronograph register hours and a handsome varnished red tip. It manages to prevent the dial from being too austere in a watch that's otherwise entirely grayscale. So this adds some warmth to the watch, which is 100 meters water resistant and includes a remarkable triple articulated strap bracelet, a lot like Ulysse Nardin, but with more flexibility built in. The watch is also fairly thin at just over 11 millimeters. So this is one that'll easily fit underneath the cuff. 42 hours automatic winding. It has a ETA 2892 base with a Dubois de Praz module. So it's a reliable, tank tough, everyday wearable, and almost feather-light sporting option. It's also graceful enough and elegant enough to be your dress watch. And for about $4,000, it's a fantastic option from a brand that's really on the rise in the watch space and in collector esteem. Taking a quick detour through Saxony, we have the Grand Longo 1 in its luminous form. This is not the lumen, this is luminous. White gold, 41.9 millimeters. It's the original Grand Longo 1 case launched in 2003, not the smaller version from after 2011. You can see that the finish you obtain with this watch is as good as any in the business, as I don't need to declare any of the features of a Longo caliber. You already know them well. Just know this, if you're new to the brand, this is the German Patek Philippe in quality and engineering. The finish holds up under the highest levels of magnification, and if I could draw your attention to just one component, it's this balance cock, which is freehand engraved, set with a fired blue screw and capped with a black polished swan's neck fine adjustment mechanism. We're gonna do one more lume shot for this watch because it deserves it. And here we are. We're back with the Grand Longo 1 Luminous. Note even the power reserve on this dial has been loomed. And we finish up with the big piece. Other than the 6 grand complications of 2013, this was the first a Longo Unzona striking, or I should say repeating watch, as it succeeded the somewhat less complicated, okay, much less complicated, Zeitwerk striking. But Longo wanted to go big. Since Patek had it beat by a mile to striking and chiming watches, Longo made its first minute repeater a decimo repeater. And I'm going to demonstrate the system right here. It's powered by the mainspring barrel rather than a separate strike barrel, 44.2 millimeters in platinum. It will hold and display the time being chimed until the chime is finished. Also, watch the power reserve diminish as it runs off the mainspring barrel. So here we go. There you go. Notice how far after the turn of the minute it jumped. And that is part of a complicated system that starts with driving the repeater off the barrel so that you can't partially pull a slide. If you partially pull a slide on a repeater, you partially charge the mechanism, inevitably damage is done. It also locks the crown during the chime so that you can't accidentally change the time or wind the watch. Now the dial consists of the strikers, which are black polished, and the gong, the dial itself, which is made of sterling silver and then galvanized silver gray, and then this nickel anthracite time bridge, which is actually part of the movement, and that clear sapphire is actually the pivot at the center for the 2 wheels that display the minutes. Turn it all over, caliber L0435. What I love here is that because there wasn't room for a separate strike barrel, they were able to drive the repeater off of the mainspring barrel with no loss of torque to the balance, because the standard Zeitwerk features a remontoir d'égalité constant force device. This is a system that uses a double third wheel with a hairspring sandwiched in between. It's just underneath my finger. 1 minute apart, it will take a certain amount of energy from the barrel, charge up that hairspring, and then it's delivered to the balance in the escapement, which beats away at 18,000 vibrations per hour, features an overcoil, is 5 position adjusted, and free sprung. So because the barrel only drives the escapement through that hairspring remontoir, it doesn't matter that the torque of the barrel falls while the repeater is operating, as the barrel itself never directly drives the escapement. The finish is world class: blued screws, black screws, perlage, anglage, freehand engraving, glasuta stripes, jewels in chaton, and of course you can see the mirrored anglage. I'll do my best to show you on both the nickel, copper, zinc, German silver elements and the steel components of the remontoir system. As good as it gets, and rare for a Longo, a full deployant clasp with trigger release to avoid dropping a watch with a retail price of almost $500,000 and a movement with 93 jewels and 771 parts. Throw it on the wrist. I could say if your wrist is 15 centimeters circumference or larger, you could wear it. Tiny wrists need not apply, but you don't necessarily need a huge wrist to wear it well. And this is a timepiece that you will, well, want to wear. As good as it gets, the best of the best. If you love what you see here and you want to make it your own, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.